Okay, we're recording. Wonderful.
Okay.
What page are we?
It's 38b. Lamed Ches Amud Beis, 38b.
Words are?
It starts with a word, it's a very interesting word. Shesisa, shtita'a.
Huh?
Shtita'a. A sweet porridge made from roasted grain. Sorry? What I think it's right towards the bottom in the classic text. I think if it's the classic text, it's towards the bottom. Have you got
number 15? 15. With regards to
No. You're looking in
pizza.
Yeah.
I'm looking at your Gemora.
Yeah, you're looking at mine. I think Michael wants to know where it is.
In the article.
Yeah, Shtita. Just do. Okay, we just lost the text for a second.
Is this better? Because
I don't know what happened over there, but we did somehow.
Yes.
Okay, so are we ready, everybody? So the Gemora continues to analyze various different foods, and it's a little bit of a culinary lesson as well, because it talks about how certain foods were prepared, certain traditional foods that were prepared and utilized, lentil foods, grain foods. I was actually walking in a Pick and Pay a few hours ago, and it was actually fascinating to see the whole vegan section, how many things there are that are made now from seeds and lentils. Reminds me of this, because over here too, we're talking about various foods that were created out of seeds and lentils and roasting them. In the Middle East, we know about hummus and tahina, but there are many other things that were traditionally made either from lentils or grains, and they had very unique recipes. And the Gemora wants to discuss what type of foods, and we've been doing this for a while, so this is down the list already. We discussed various other foods. The Gemora wants to discuss various foods and what is their status vis-a-vis the rabbis' decree of Bishul Akum. The rabbis had decreed that when Gentiles prepare a cooked food, or even a pickled food, if it's pickled for long enough, in certain cases, Jewish people would not be able to partake from that food unless they turned the oven on or were involved in the preparation. So there was this gezerah, this decree called Bishul Akum, meaning food cooked by non-Jews. And then in addition to that, there was other issues that sometimes, even if there wasn't a problem with the food per se, there would be an issue with any additions or additives. Like, for instance, we spoke a lot about wine and the problem of wine that was produced for idolatrous rituals, for idolatrous purposes, and that extends to vinegar, because the wine-based vinegars are basically made from wine. They were originally wine, and then they became vinegar. If they part of the ingredients, that could also be a problem. And based on that, the Gemara discusses various foods, and it wants to know if these are generic foods that a person can go and eat. And just reminding everybody, because some of us are new, we don't paskin, that means we don't rule from Talmudic discussion. So in other words, nobody goes into the supermarket tomorrow and says, I can do this, that, or the other, because that's what it said in the Gemara. There were sages before us who they had that job, because as you'll see in front of your nose, there's so many different opinions here and different views and different ways of outlook. So it's only the expert rabbis that were able to decipher and extract the conclusions and the halacha, the codifiers, the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, the Rambam, they were able to decipher, but it does give us an idea of how things work. We do learn how halacha, how rulings are extracted and what actually happens. And just for example, in today's day and age, you might find out that certain foods are generic, meaning that because of the way in which they're produced, you can go and buy them even if they don't necessarily have a kosher certification, like cold pressed extra virgin olive oil. You don't necessarily have to worry about certification. If you find it, then it's clearly a pure olive oil. Or for instance, in some parts of the world, South Africa is an exception because we have a lot of grapes here, but there are a lot of parts of the world where people will drink juice that is 100% pure, a fruit or vegetable juice that is reliably pure and doesn't have any additives or anything else mixed in. There are many parts of the world where they will have that, whether or not there is formal certification. And even with certain fishes, like there are people who would have canned sardines nowadays. There are other issues which actually the Gemora will discuss some of them, but there definitely was a time that in many even observant communities in the world, things like canned sardines that were literally just uplifted from the ocean and put straight into the cans, there were many who would utilize them even if they didn't have a formal certification. Today, there are many places where you can get formal certification. There are mashgichim, that means there are people that go and check what's doing. And based on this, even in those days, the Gemora wanted to talk about various foods and delicacies that were prepared. A lot of people prepared stuff at home. Was a lot of home industry. What could you use and what couldn't you use of the various different things that were available around? The one which we start with today, for those on the screen, it says shesisa or shetita, which was a sweet porridge made from roasted grain and honey. So they would roast grain or seeds, and they would the Gemora and the commentaries would actually say that it was specifically a style where they would roast lentils or grains. They would catch them a little bit before they were fully dried. They would be still a bit moist. You can get your lentils in all different, how would you call it, stages of drying. Even beans, you can get them fully dry, or you can get them when they're still a little bit moist. In this case, they would catch it somewhere in between. Then they would roast it. Apparently, if you caught it in between, it had a sweeter flavor. And into that roasted mix, they would add usually a wine. That was the typical thing. They would either put in grape wine or grape vinegar. And this was a typical dish that was cooked and prepared. And that's the one that the Gemora is discussing here. A particular type of, he calls it a porridge. But this particular porridge, there were different types. There was a type made from lentils. There was a type made from grains, from, how would you call it, more of the, what do we call them? The main grains, the 5 main grains: wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. And then there was a type that it was more common to add vinegar and wine, which would create a bigger problem for Jews, because then we wouldn't know which vinegar or wine was added to it. And there was a type that it wasn't common to add vinegar and wine. So that's the gist of the discussion. So the Gemara says, Shesisa, with regard to this type of sweet porridge, roasted grain porridge, Rav Shara, there are different views. Rav deemed it permitted, Rav allowed it. Abu the Shmuel V'Levi Asra. Another 2 sages, one who is called the father of Shmuel. Shmuel was more famous, so he's known of as Shmuel's father. The father of Shmuel and Levi deemed it prohibited.
So Rabbi, I couldn't name my dog Shmuel.
Not that wouldn't be nice. Shmuel's a holy name from Shmuel.
Holy name, I definitely couldn't name my dog Shmuel.
Find you a different name.
Yeah. The Rabbi, definitely not.
Anyway, so that is the Gemora sets out. The Gemora sets out the 2 sides of this debate, and then it proceeds to unpack what is the substance of the debate. Why would it be that Rav would say it's okay, and Abu the Shmuel and Levi would say it's not okay? So the Gemora unpacks it in its usual style. Gemora often categorize. We can't be talking about this where everybody agrees, and we can't be talking about that. So the Gemara starts off by saying, what kind of sweet grain porridge are you talking about? If you're talking about the type, the variety that's made from wheat and barley, nobody disagrees. Everybody agrees. Nobody disagrees is a double negative. So everybody agrees, the Shara, that's okay. So that it's okay. But talpacha de challah, and if you're talking about the lentil variety that's made with vinegar, kula almala plega de asir, everybody agrees that it's not permitted. So in other words, it seemed that the style of cooking, the chefs had their styles. It seems that the wheat barley variety commonly didn't have wine and vinegar as an additive, so everybody was okay with it. And it seems that the lentil variety did have wine and vinegar as an additive, so everybody wasn't okay with it because they were worried about the vinegar and the wine. So in these cases, they didn't argue. Ki plega, where was the argument? But talpacha de maya, with the lentil variety when it was made with water instead of vinegar and wine. Mar sobar, one opinion is of the view, gazrin on ha atu ha, that we decree against this because of that. Mar sobar, and the other opinion, lo gazrin, and we don't decree. This is, again, a formula that you'll find often in Gemora, a gzeira of this because of that. What happened was that sometimes the rabbis had a decree, and they would say that the problem is that X is too similar to Y. So if we're going to create a differential, we're going to get people mixed up. Generally, this shisa was made out of, if it was made with lentils, the split pea variety, it was almost certain that there would be wine or vinegar in it. So even if they would make it with water, which was possible, what happened was, according to one view, the rabbis put a blanket decree on that particular type of food because generally it was made with wine and vinegar. So they made a decree on this because of that. And another view was you don't decree one because of the other. The one must say on the ingredients, this is made with wine and vinegar, and the other one doesn't. In other words, and that is, so the Gemora unpacks, that's the argument between them. So once again, to summarize, they're not arguing about the variety of sweet porridge sisa that's made from wheat and barley, because generally no chef puts wine or vinegar in that. They're not arguing about the variety of lentils that's made with wine and vinegar. They're about the type that's lentils, but made with water. But because it's more commonly made with wine and vinegar, some say that you decree this because of that, and some say that you don't. So this is basically how it is dealt with. So the Gemora says, V'ika de Amra, there is another opinion that say, no, they structure the whole discussion differently. But talpacha de maya, with a lentil porridge called shasisa, that's made with water, kula almala plega de aser. Everybody agrees that it's prohibited. Everybody says we are careful with the lentil one. You know why? Because it's generally made with wine and vinegar. He plega, where is the argument? So there's another view that it was all different. The chita v'sara dafka, specifically with the wheat barley varieties. Mar savar gazrinan ha'atu. One opinion is that you have to decree against the one made from grain because of the one made from lentils. Or mar savar, and the other opinion is lo gazrinan. You don't make such a decree. What you're seeing over here, as we've said many times, that Gemora is a memory exercise. It's a memory discussion. The people are remembering what they learned from the rabbis by tradition. So you've got a difference of opinion here as to exactly what occurred in the original discussion. Like sometimes we could sit here and talk and somebody would say, no, I was at the meeting. I remember clearly it was the guys on the left of the table that said this and the guys that said that. And somebody else says, no, you've got it wrong. It was them who said that and them who said that. You've got that kind of format going on over here. So you've got a different presentation of where was the decree based. Did they decide to outlaw the porridge made from wheat and barley because of the porridge made from lentils? In other words, because the one with lentils had wine in it, which caused trouble. So therefore, they might have outlawed wheat and barley as well. Or did they not outlaw it as well? Then, because of the fact that we're discussing this porridge called shasisa, the Gemara tells a story. Omar Rav said, Tirei minei shasisa. There were two different species or types, varieties of this porridge called shasisa. Shodar Barzilai Hagiladi LeDavid. In a story in Tanakh, there was a fellow called Barzilai the Gileadite, and he sent a whole bunch of presents to King David, to David HaMelech. And amongst the things that he sent him, if you look at the list of what he sent, It's recorded in the book of Samuel, Samuel 2. There's two books. You were talking about Shmuel just before. Shmuel Bays, Samuel 2. It says that he sent him a whole bunch of presents. Some were furniture, food presents, and over there it talks about two different types of roasted grain porridge. It's written over there, and he quotes the whole thing. Mishka v'sapoits, there were sapois, there were beds and basins, ukliyotzer and earthen vessels, chitimus ha'orim, there was wheat and there was barley. V'kemach, there was flour, so that's obviously milled grain that's milled into flour. And then this one is interesting. It says v'kali, there was parched grain. Upul, there were beans. V'adashim, and there were lentils. V'kali, and again parched lentils. So in the expression, it talks about the fact that they sent him grain and lentils, and two times over it uses an expression of parched pulse. Parched pulse is a parched lentil and parched grain. What is parched? So what basically it means is that they would take these lentils or these grains, again, before they were dry, when they were still a little bit moist, they would then roast it. Sorry?
Like
they used to do with the omer, exactly. And based on that, they'd get like a different consistency. So although it was the same thing, it was presented or sold in a different kind of way. And he says, V'hashta, and nowadays, Hudakamapka, Tzana L'shuka de Nahardia, what you see nowadays is that plenty baskets and baskets are taken out into the marketplace of Nahardia, and nobody is worrying about the stringent rulings of Shmuel's father and Levi. In other words, in this story over here, what Rav is saying is that if you look at what goes on practically around, sometimes you learn from what important people are doing. You see this whole list of these different ingredients in Tanakh, spoken of how this fellow called Barzillai, the Gileadite, brought these things to King David. And he says, by the way, in this list, this thing called parched grain and parched lentils is so popular that in the marketplace, Nahardia was one of the big Babylonian towns. In the marketplace in Nahardia, they're bringing it out in baskets. In other words, it's a common commodity. It's on everybody's shopping list. Whoever's walking down the aisle and Pick and Pay, look in their trolley, you're going to see this. This is a common thing. And he says, and nobody's worrying. You don't see people stopping and saying, can a Jew buy this? Can't a Jew buy this? Everybody's buying it. In other words, who is worrying about the stringency that you mentioned above, that the father of Shmuel and Levi was stringent and said one may not use this? The reality is that's not what the people are doing. They're all using it as much as they want. In other words, he's saying, practically speaking, it looks like the winner of the way people are following is according to what Rav says, the Shara, that it's okay. That this particular parched grain and parched lentils is free for all. In other words, people are buying it like a commodity. People are walking in, in Israel, you have the shuk, and in some places in the world, the observant Jews too, they're walking down the marketplace and they are buying it. They're buying it in bulk, they're buying it in baskets. It's a staple. So that's basically Rav presenting that it doesn't seem that there's any stringency on this particular food whatsoever. Continuing on this discussion, the Gemora talks about boiled and pickled vegetables. We moved from parched grains and lentils to boiled and pickled vegetables. The Mishnah had said, what about the fact that there's certain kinds of vegetables which were boiled and pickled? And don't forget, in those days, we didn't have the canners that steam all the cans for us. You couldn't, there was no Koo and Rhodes and all these companies that can all the vegetables. So it was a home industry kind of thing. If you wanted canned vegetables or canned fruits, you'd have to go to the man in the street or the neighbor or the person in the marketplace who does or sells that particular kind of thing. But now in boiling and pickling vegetables, there were some that it was common to put wine in and some that it was not common to put wine in. So we're back to the same problem. If it was common to put wine in them, if, for instance, if it was a general recipe that a particular olive or a particular kind of fruit or vegetable was canned or boiled or pickled or whatever, actually not canned, but boiled, pickled, or prepared with wine, now you have to worry that maybe the Gentiles put their non-kosher wine in it. But if they didn't put wine in it, so the Mishnah had said, this is again our Gemora unpacking a Mishnah that we already learned a while ago, and there's always what they call a dibura maschil. It gives the phrase, it quotes that phrase from the Mishnah. So the Mishnah had said, kvashin, boiled and pickled vegetables, shedarkon losais peseichon yain, that it is common, it's the way, the culinary style is to put wine in those particular vegetables, then you can't use them because you've got a problem. Most probably there is wine in there. So Omar Chizkiah commented on this and he said, Lo shanu, we didn't learn elo shedarkon. If it's the way to put wine, avol b'yadua, but if it's for sure, if it's for certain that they put in wine, osur afilu bahano, it is prohibited to utilize it, not only to consume it, but to have hana, to have benefit from it. Now, we mentioned a few times, just to give everybody a bit of background on this one, when it comes to a food that we're not allowed to have, there's what's called a isur achila, which means a prohibition on eating it, consuming it as a food. And then sometimes it's even more stringent. There's a isur hana, which means we cannot even benefit from it. We can't feed it to our animals. We can't feed it to non-Jews who we're responsible to take care of their meals, because then we'd be benefiting by giving it to them to eat. So sometimes when there is a prohibition on a food, it's only achila, you can't eat it. And sometimes it's even more stringent. There's a prohibition on hana, you can't have any benefit from it. Now, what the Mishnah had said over there was, don't utilize the boiled vegetables that non-Jews prepare, which it's common to prepare with wine, but you may have hana, you may have benefit from it. You could sell it, you could trade with it, you could use it for other benefits, just that you can't eat it, you can't consume it. Chizkiah now comments on that Mishnah and says, hold on a second. When we said you're allowed to have benefit, we meant, well, we don't know for sure that there was wine in it. We just assume that there could be, because the general way of preparing that type of vegetable is with wine. It means the way is to prepare it with wine. Then you can't eat it, but you can have hana, you can have benefit. But if you know for sure, if you know for sure that there is wine, then you cannot even have hana. You can't have any benefit. On this, we're just going to finish up. On this, the Gemora poses a question. Now, you'll remember a few pages back, one of the foods that the Gemora had discussed was a food called moiras, which was a fish stew that they used to make in those days. And this fish stew was also commonly made with wine. And we had the same problem. We said that the wine could be an issue because the non-Jews would put their non-kosher wine in the fish stew. And at that time, when we learned about fish stew, we learned that you are entitled to have benefit from it. You can't eat it, but you can benefit from it. So now the Gemora wants to know, what's the difference between the fish stew that the non-Jew put their non-kosher wine in, the yain nesach, and this boiled vegetable that they put the wine in? What's the difference from moiras, from fish stew? The sharu rabbanon bahana, over there we see that the rabbis did allow benefit. So why over here would they not allow benefits? So the Gemara explains the difference is over there, the purpose of adding the wine to the fish stew was merely to remove the stench. In other words, fish can have sometimes a very unappealing side to it. So what they used to do was the wine or the grape vinegar, the balsamic type of vinegar, had the power. Its chemical reaction was that it removed, how would you call it, the unpleasing side of the fish stew. So they weren't actually adding it to improve the taste. They were adding it just to take away or remove a particular, it's like, you've got in the factories that produce food, what they call a food engineer. That's a person who's trained and they know what additives are going to have an effect and how it's going to balance out the chemicals in the food and the tastes. So it would almost seem that the chemical engineers or the food engineers would have said that sometimes, your fishy stuff is going to get a little bit too strong. It's going to be too fishy. So the way you can sort of moderate that is by adding wine. You put in a bit of wine, you're going to moderate the fish taste. So you're not using the wine to actually taste the wine. You're using the wine to negate the taste of the fish. So therefore, because the wine was used for a lower purpose, the rabbis decided that even if it is yain nesach, wine used by Gentiles, it's less of an issue. And although we don't eat it, you can have hana. There's no isur hana. There's no prohibition on having benefits. You can still sell it or use it or benefit from it. But in this case over here, sorry, in this case, let's just finish the thread. But in this case over here, when it comes to the vegetables, the purpose of adding the wine to the vegetables is actually to add a wine taste to the vegetables. It's a specific targeted wine taste, and therefore here it was more serious, and they didn't want you to benefit from it. Hasam la'burazuma, that was to remove the fish taste. Hachalim tukatama, here it was to improve the taste. Now, I think we already mentioned, we explained in previous shiurim, that sometimes when something that's not good or not kosher or whatever, there's all different rules, but goes into something, there's noisen tam lepagam and noisen tam leshvach, which in English means you either could be improving the taste by what you've added, or you could be doing the opposite. Or you could be, the third option is neutralizing something, but not improving or causing the taste to deteriorate. Now, according to many opinions, if the taste is deteriorating as a result of the additive, then the additive is less serious than if it actually adds to the taste. Or pagam. Like a pagam means a blemish. It's basically it's causing a what's the word? You're reducing, you're messing around with the taste. But Rabbi Yochanan Omar, sorry? Yeah, absolutely. But Rabbi Yochanan Omar, yeah, shvach, yeah, and to prove it comes from like the word shevach, yeah. But Rabbi Yochanan Omar,
in the Mizmor the Shabbat to say shevach, not anymore.
the same word, yeah, similar word, yeah. But Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Rabbi Yochanan taught, afilu b'yadu anami mutar, even if it is known for sure that the Gentiles had added wine or vinegar that was made from wine to pickled vegetables, it would be permissible to have benefit from it, not to eat it, but to benefit. So then the Gemara wants to know, why would he say that's different to the fish stew that Rabbi Meir argued with the other sages? Rabbi Meir said with a fish stew, you cannot have benefit from the wine from it because the wine was added to it. And Rabbi Yochanan wants to allow benefit from wine that was added to boiled vegetables. So the Gemara says here there's a different reason. Hasam over there, yedia mamoshay. You can recognize the additive as a substantial component or a recognizable component of what it was added to. Here you would not be able to recognize the component as a separate thing. So in other words, what he's saying is sometimes you add something to a recipe and it's very clear that it's there. In other words, it's obvious. Even somebody looks at, you make a stew, let's say, and there's a lot of things, or cholent, a lot of things mixed together. There's certain ingredients that a person can look at the ingredients and say, hey, that's a potato, that's a piece of barley. It might be mixed into the stew, but it's also discernible as a recognizable component. And then you get ingredients that just melt into the situation and they no longer have an obvious presence. Unless somebody's, how would you call it, a very skilled food person, they're not even going to know what's inside. They're not going to know what's inside it. So basically here the Gemara is saying that the difference is based on whether it's a recognizable component or not. In the case where you add wine to the fish stew, to the moiras, he wants to say, the wine remains a recognizable component. Anybody that looks at that fish stew can say, this is a wine-based fish stew. It's very obvious. The color's there, the consistency is there, and it's obvious. And therefore, That's why Rabbi Meir said he doesn't want a Jew to have benefit from that fish stew when treif wine was added, because the wine is there. But when you add the wine to pickled vegetables, it tends to get lost in the mixture, and nobody can really, they just see a sauce, they see a gravy, and they have no idea whether there's actually wine in that gravy, and therefore it wasn't as much of an issue because it's not a recognizable component. And Rabbi Yochanan said you can benefit from it. You don't have to give up benefiting from it. I think that's where we'll stop inside. If anybody's got any questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
We always have a
Now I need to do the door.
Marco, what time will be from the bridge? I've got to give it to you quick, wasn't it?
Can you give us a horse? He's giving you
Already
a
given
bottle of whiskey and a bottle of wine. The two car shots.
L'chaim, everybody.
L'chaim. Thanks, Rav. I'm gonna switch off. Thank you.
Mazel tov, Sydney. L'chaim.
L'chaim. Mazel tov.
L'chaim.
We can make bracha